Welcome and thank you for joining me for another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, and I'm here at the News Forum where all voices matter. Our now weekly federal election panel is with us once again. Former Finance Minister Joe Oliver is joined by former Alberta Cabinet Minister and head of the Canada West Foundation, Gary Marr. Sandra Pupatello remains on the hustings, so subbing in for the first time is Stephen Taylor, a former senior political advisor to the Leader of the Opposition. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
I should make mention of the fact that this is being recorded just before the French language debate and will be aired around the same time as the English language debate. So our panelists do not have the ability to predict the future in that regard, but we're going to have a great political discussion nonetheless. Joe Oliver, let's start with you. What do you make of the campaign so far in vote-rich Ontario?
Well, I think it's paralleling a bit the entire country. We started with a lot of conservative momentum because the election really was believed by most people to be unnecessary. It happened in the day that Kabul fell, and people were resentful that they were going to have to go to vote during a rising pandemic. And that issue is still around, but things are moving on a little bit from that. I mean, whether the momentum has crested or not is the critical factor. And I think we'll find out in the next couple of days, the French debate tonight, the English debate tomorrow, whether there's a breakthrough. Now, debates usually don't have those moments, but occasionally they do. And one of them was when Brian Mulroney during the debate regarding free trade, commented on the fact that there were so many Liberal appointees to the Senate, and that his opponent could have done better and should have. Whether that will be repeated again, I don't know. It's not that likely. So right now we seem to be very close to the 2019 numbers, and I think most pollsters seem to give the Conservatives a bit of an edge, maybe a point or two, depending. And typically, Conservatives do a little bit better than the pollsters indicate the day before. So maybe there's a slight lead there, but not enough, certainly, for a majority at this stage. One of the interesting questions that not many people have talked about is the fact that there may well be a lower voter turnout, and just what the impact that might be on the vote. And it sort of goes both ways. On the one hand, Conservatives tend to be more motivated, and that'll work to their advantage. Also, the voters tend to be a bit older, and they vote more. And this time, it looks like the youth is a little less interested, and they may vote less. On the other side, of course, older people are a little more concerned, and understandably so, about COVID. So that might work the other way. So we've got that kind of an issue. In terms of substantive stuff, there's so much discussion about things that aren't really particularly relevant to what's going to happen down the road, but they've kind of taken off. I think the Prime Minister has benefited from the hostility, ironically, that he keeps encountering on the hustings, and the fact that some people threw some gravel at him, or was it stones? I mean, the farther you go to the left, was it a boulder? It wasn't something that he did, presumably, and yet this goes. This is unacceptable, obviously, and Canadians don't like that. So it seems to have helped him more than than some of the issues that are particularly relevant for the country, including cost of living, inflation, and how we're going to deal with the enormous debt. So we've got an election that where you haven't had too much of a breakthrough, except
Right.
that clearly, we're not looking at,
Right.
at the liberal majority that the prime minister was hoping for, and that was the reason he called the election the first.
I'm going to call time on you, Joe. That was a great synopsis. We are going to take a brief commercial break. And welcome back to Boom and Bust for our now weekly panel looking over the federal election with Joe Oliver, Gary Marr, and our special guest today, Stephen Taylor. Gary Marr, let's turn to you now. Any movement or new issues arising in Western Canada in week 4 of the election campaign?
I just wanted to reiterate what Joe said about these physical attacks upon the Prime Minister. I think it's notable and important that both the leader of the NDP, Jagmeet Singh, and Aaron O'Toole have both denounced this kind of activity. I think there's no doubt that while there may be great differences in views, the issue of trying to interrupt the Prime Minister from getting his message across, I think, is quite wrong. I think most Canadians recognize that none of the parties want to be associated with this whatsoever. I've been here in the Lower Mainland of British Columbia. I'm at the University of British Columbia's campus today, and I have to say that what I'm seeing on the ground here is that there seems to be a much greater comfort with the idea of Aaron O'Toole becoming Prime Minister. This is something that has been slow and steady. It has not been as a result of a single event, but I think that quite steadily, I think that the leader of the opposition is growing his support here. I think Jagmeet Singh is also doing well here in the Lower Mainland. The rest of British Columbia is a lot more like Alberta and Saskatchewan, and there's a great deal of angst with respect to the Prime Minister and his positions with respect to the development of responsible energy. Here in the Lower Mainland, there's a lot of seats to be won and lost here. And I think there's a growing support for both the NDP and for the Conservative Party of Canada.
Thank you for that analysis. Stephen Taylor, it's now your opportunity to give your analysis of the situation. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just echo again that, of course, any physical attack against any of our democratic leaders is really an attack on our democracy and the principles that most rational Canadians share, and that is that we have a democracy because we, this is how we express ourselves, and this is how we build a better society together. But I will say that Aaron O'Toole has not provided a very compelling sparring partner that Justin Trudeau is seeking on the hustings. So Justin Trudeau actually looks like he's wanting to divide and run against the people who are screaming at him, from his campaign stops. We're not seeing a lot of his campaign stops indoors and, in private locations. They're more open to the public and more out in the open, outdoors. And a lot of people are sort of scratching their heads, but like, why, given all the protests that are happening against Justin Trudeau, why he wouldn't have them in more of a contained space with sort of more closed and controlled crowd. And some are saying that, well, this is due to the fact that he's actually jockeying to point at him and saying, look, it's either me or it's the mob. And he's totally ignoring running against Aaron O'Toole, and he's actually running against sort of this nebulous other, which is a mob of people. He actually, I think, said they were foaming at the mouth, and that their views are un-Canadian. And while we might disagree with other people's views, he is certainly positioning himself against anyone but Aaron O'Toole, which I think is very interesting.
Yeah, no, good point. Joe Oliver, I'm sure you, as former economic ministers, would love to see the fiscal situation being the one of the debate topics anyway, in terms of election issues. Is there one issue that has become the hot button issue? Is it gun control? Is it anti-vaxxers? What's going on out there?
Well, as I was saying before, the issues that seem to be that the Prime Minister, at least, is pushing are issues where there either is no difference or they're kind of irrelevant to what political life will be after the election. And on abortion, on guns, on healthcare, there really aren't substantive differences. So just to carry on what Stephen was saying and Gary, the leader of the opposition, Aaron O'Toole, has succeeded to a large extent in defining himself rather than being defined, which is really critical. And the definition is hard to attack from Trudeau's perspective. So I think
hold that thought. We've just run out of time, but I do want to. This is a very important point. We'll come back to it right after the break. Please stay with us. And we're back here at Boom and Bust with our weekly election panel featuring Joe Oliver, former Minister of Finance, Gary Marr, Canada West Foundation, and Stephen Taylor, a senior political advisor. Joe, I had to cut you off to go to a commercial, but please do continue your thought. I think it's a very important one.
Sure. I think the Prime Minister is conducting, out of desperation, a very negative and divisive campaign. He's trying to accuse the leader of the opposition of every evil that the Conservatives allegedly are guilty of, and it's not really sticking. So, as Stephen pointed out, he's running against anybody he can. He mentioned the former Prime Minister Stephen Harper's name quite a few times. I don't think that's sticking particularly. So now he's running against the mob. So it's a somewhat dispiriting campaign. Unfortunately, it worked when he ran against Andrew Scheer, and it seems to actually have stopped the Conservative momentum for a moment. So it would really be unfortunate if this major substantive issues, I mean, his record and his plans for a dystopian government intrusive future are not really on the top of the list of concerns. But I do think people at the end of the day are concerned about cost of living. They're worried about inflation. I mean, inflation's up to 3.7%, and the economy was down 1.1% in the last quarter. That's the definition of stagflation. Sure. And so people are not getting ahead. They're falling behind. And this is a government that has consigned the current generation, the next generation, and probably the generation after that, to perpetual debt payments. These are the issues that, among others, that should be discussed. And then, of course, there's the colossal moral failure in terms of foreign policy and the departure from Afghanistan, leaving behind many more people than the Americans did. We abandoned most of our friends and allies, people who have been working for us for the last 2 decades. This is really shameful and a stain on our national honor.
Can I, Gary Marr, can I ask you this, maybe from your perspective then? Joe has mentioned the point about, these cost of living and economic issues. Do you think that maybe it's the debates? Do you think that they can refocus the campaign debate on some of these cost of living and economic issues?
I think if you look at the campaigning that's being done by both the NDP and the Conservative Party, I think they're both aiming themselves towards that. So the debates could prove to be pivotal in this area. And it'll be interesting to see what happens. And Joe commented on how difficult it will be to determine what it is that young people are going to do if they vote at all. But it's interesting that the people who voted for Mr. Trudeau in 2015, they're now 6 years older, and some of them are going to be taxpayers now. And so it'll be interesting to see if, as taxpayers and people who are starting to take more interest in such fiscal matters, whether that will change their view as to whether or not voting for Justin Trudeau was the right thing to do.
Stephen Taylor, love to get your point of view. Obviously, we're taping before the debates, but the debates will have happened. Then the advance polls open. and then we've got election day. So we're definitely running fast now. What should the parties be doing? And maybe take from Gary Marr that point about those millennial voters. What do you think the pitches are going to be or should be in the upcoming days?
So if I'm Justin Trudeau, I don't want to talk about the economy at all during the debates. I actually want to continue to wedge on, it's either me or the mob. And obviously when people throw stones at Trudeau, I mean, I'm a staunch conservative. I had a sympathy for Trudeau at that moment. And I was like, that's exactly what's happening here. So I think Trudeau might try to play more of that up, saying, look, it's me or a ton of uncertainty. I think for younger voters and millennials, usually vote on aspirational topics of what they want the world to be, what they want to see in the world, usually on whether it's foreign policy, aid, making a better world. And unfortunately, it's a very realism-based election this time around. COVID has changed the script for a lot of people with respect to what they want to see around the world. Afghanistan has changed that script. There's a lot of stark realism that's going on in the world today. So for millennials, it's going to be
I'm just going to have to cut you off because we have to go to break one more time. And welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here at the News Forum. We're here with our weekly election panel. We've got Joe Oliver, former finance minister, Gary Marr, former Alberta cabinet minister and head of the Canada West Foundation. And joining us this week, Stephen Taylor, a former and current senior political advisor. Stephen, we had to cut you off for commercial. Sorry about that, but please continue your thought from the break.
Oh, yeah. So I was just saying that millennials and younger voters, especially younger voters, tend to vote more aspirational. Usually in elections, vote for, foreign policy issues, making the world a better place. But right now, the world is falling apart, and we don't necessarily know immediately how to fix that right now. So this has become a very realism-based election for younger voters. And I think that they're starting to look at, things that affect them more directly. Like affordability issues. I don't think many millennials or Gen Z believe that they will ever own a house in this country. And, they just see housing prices just skyrocket and have skyrocketed for the past 10 years, especially in Ontario and out west. So for younger voters, those pocketbook issues that the NDP and the Conservatives are talking about directly are going to resonate. And I think that, after marijuana, Trudeau has not really offered anything new to younger voters. I mean, he did lie on the first past the post issue on electoral reform, which was also very important for younger, more aspirational, change the world type of voters. And yeah, I think realism has all hit us very hard in the last 18 months. And, with Afghanistan, just fresh in the front view, I think a lot of those younger voters are going to start looking more domestically and more through a realistic lens at their options here.
Gary Marr, I want to flip this to you very briefly. We've got a couple of minutes left, but it sounds like the rest of Canada has joined the party, joined the Western Canadian anger at the status quo in a sense, because that feeling of anger and disenchantment has been a moniker of Western alienation for a while. Are you sensing the same thing?
I'm not sure if it's quite as strong in the rest of Canada as it is in Western Canada, but I will say this, there certainly has been a change in the media. And I might make this observation, every senior media person in Canada has spent time serving an assignment in Afghanistan. And all of them have had people that have been left behind, that were their fixers, that were the people that helped out, whether it's Kevin Newman or Lisa Laflamme or Don Martin or others, safely negotiate their way outside the wire in Kandahar. And I think that the media is taking a really different look at what they view to be a failure of public policy, foreign policy, Afghanistan. And so I think that has a difference in how the media is looking at the gulf that exists between the rhetoric and the acts of the federal government on this important matter that Stephen talked about.
Well, we've had more debate in this panel on foreign policy than they'll allow in the English debates. Joe Oliver, we got a minute left. Who's going to win the debates?
I think on balance, Aaron O'Toole will do better because Trudeau has a problem of competence, authenticity, and moral authority. And he's vulnerable to attacks on all of them. And I think a lot of people are fed up, but many of them have the Liberals as default. And it's difficult to move them off it. It's almost like a religion. They identify. It's a question of identity. But a number of people that I've talked to are sort of so fed up with so many of the failures and his betrayal of women, of Aboriginals, of middle class Canadians. So I think there's so many opportunities for Aaron O'Toole with a smile to go after him and present himself as a likable and competent and authentic alternative. And if he can do that, that will be critical.
Well, there you have it. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for our panel for joining us for yet another week. And thank you for watching. We'll be watching the debates very, very closely. Thanks again. I'd like to thank our panel again. Obviously, a lot to consider, obviously, before the debates, but I think it's still very relevant after the debates as well. Thanks for joining us. We will continue our election coverage pretty well 24/7 until Election Day.